Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Freshly Pressed. Hey, so today we have with us Lorry Jamison, all the way from St. Louis, Missouri. And welcome to on the show, Lorry.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so glad to be here.
Awesome. Lorry is the creator of Blush, the very recent comic that we published on Comix.one, and Party Animals, another book from the Nightshade anthology. Is that correct, Lorry?
Yes, indeed. It's I don't know if you ever grew up with the book series Goosebumps by Earl Stein, or like heard of that. That was kind of my main inspiration, but just a lot more inclusive and queer and comicsy. And so yeah, it's all part of this overarching anthology, but each story is going to be nice and self-contained and have a nice color scheme along with it.
Nice. More of all of that, please. so,
Thank you. Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, in your own words, Laurie, can you give us a brief history about yourself and tell us how you got into comics in the first place?
Absolutely. So I am Lori. I'm a non-binary cartoonist who is based all the way in St. Louis, Missouri, kind of nice smack dab in the Midwest of the U.S. For listeners not in the area. Um, yeah, and so gosh, I mean, I've really loved comics. I think as soon as I first saw them in my local library, I think I was just transfixed by like probably Sonic the Hedgehog. They did a lot of those licensed comics back in like the early 2000s that really would have had an impact there. Um,
Mm.
and so yeah, I make a lot of queer comics, a lot of queer genre comics, and my goal is to really create a lot of middle grade and young adult material that's inclusive, that feels empowering, and is kind of the material that I wanted to see more of when I was growing up. I think back to, I was talking about this on a different podcast recently, but I was maybe like, and I don't want to make you feel old when I say this. I was maybe like 7 when like the original Young Avengers comic came out in like the early
Ooh.
2000s. Uh, so just to, you can, everyone can do the math. We don't need to worry about it. And that was really the first time I had seen like actual queer representation, not just in
Hmm.
comics, but really in general. Because I don't know, it was kind of the children's media has always been very sheltered, and I would say is getting more inclusive nowadays. But at least when I was growing up, it was a lot more limited. And so seeing that kind of just like stirred something in me. It was like, oh, this makes me feel like empowered. But I couldn't. I was 7. I didn't have the words for that. I didn't know why I was gravitating towards this. And then from there, I think it was the Runaways, the original Runaways comic from Marvel, where it was Zavin, the shape-shifting Skrull character. Did you read Runaways?
No, I haven't read Runaways, but I've heard really good things about it. So
It
I
is
do want to. Yeah.
excellent comic, but in at least the original run, there is a character who is this shape-shifting green alien Skrull, but kind of it's through the lens of transitioning gender. They can
Hmm.
shift their gender at will. They have a same-sex relationship, and so they kind of shift into a more feminine gender presentation. And something like that, I definitely recall reading from my local library, my local bookstore, and just like it blew my mind. I was like, you can do that?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, literally, because I mean, as far as I know, aliens don't exist. But just that concept, I think, really stirred something in me, and so I feel like I've been trying to chase that feeling and express that in the work that I make.
Yeah, that's amazing. In general, I think X-Men is so queer coded. Like even from the time before 2000s, like it has always had some subtext stuff, you know.
That has been, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's I feel like I've only been getting into that more recently, especially because you see like Mystique and her canonical wife now. And I'm like, wait, when did that happen? Because I
Yeah.
mean, there was I would read some X Men growing up. I think more so my experience was the X Men movies, which did still have a lot of
Mm.
queer coding to it. It was always, I don't know, I could tell it was there, but I couldn't put any words to it. It was just a very interesting
Mm.
viewing experience growing up with those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's amazing. Cool. Tell us a bit about Blush and Party Animals and the Nightshade anthology. And obviously you got a little bit into it, but tell us a bit more about it without spoiling it, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Or maybe I should, and this is the exclusive place to listen in on all the spoilers. Really capture the listeners there. Right.
Mm,
So I've been making these comics with well, it's called Craven Comics. It's a little bit reflected in the video here, but I do have the official T-shirt, and I've been able to work with this lovely LGBTQ focused independent publisher. They really focus on comics, specifically representation, and kind of trying to foster a really authentic perspective through that, which really resonated with me when I was kind of developing these comics. And originally, I had kind of planned this out more as a standalone graphic novel. I This was sort of flashback to like the pandemic era, and I was a recent college graduate. I was kind of wondering what to do next. I was like, I need to make my magnum opus. I need to draw 500 pages right now. This has to be a thing. And I was pitching it around and getting not a lot of response really, but also this was. I think from that, I kind of learned that the story itself was a bit too generic, was a bit too formulaic, and that's when party animals as a concept really took a hold because that was kind of the
mm,
starting point of this. And so, for those who haven't read it, it is a very fun story in which these teen werewolves crash a high school house party, and it is up to these two queer teens who are classmates, kind of have some feelings for each other, trying to figure that out in the moment while all this bizarre chaos is going on around them. It's tongue in cheek, it's fun, it has some heartfelt feelings, and it's kind of weird. But I feel like leaning into that weirdness and specificity is really
mm,
what made this story pop, and that's what attracted Craven to this when I pitched this version. And so from here, I quickly realized that graphic novels are hard. Making this 300, 400 page epic, it's a lot. And so, in an effort to um, have more sustainable creative practice, I decided let's make it an anthology. Let's break it up into these shorter, 30 to 50 page size self contained stories. And so each time it's sort of a good exercise and practice in developing these comic making skills. And so whatever you learn from the first one, you can directly take to the next one and keep going and evolving and growing so you don't kind of get stuck in this massive story that takes way too long to write and draw and create, and you can really just express yourself through a project and kind of capture that in a much more effective way in the moment.
yeah, true, 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 true. Very true. That's awesome. And you're absolutely right. I think I read half of Party Animals. I didn't finish it just yet, but it is beautiful. It is lovely. What I really loved about Party Animals was how innocent the love is, the young love is, and there's something about that. The interaction between the leads, and this something like this is real innocence about that young love that shows through that book, and that's what kind of attracted me to it. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Thank you. I think I draw upon a lot of my own experiences growing up as a queer teen of kind of figuring out gender and sexuality and that whole thing and wanting to produce that on the page, but in a very sweet way. And I think sort of the as I was working on Party Animals and then developing these additional stories, kind of my guiding mindset was, for every real world monster in the story that the characters have to fight off, they should also be confronting like a difficult feeling, whether that's dealing with their
Hmm.
crush, whether that's expressing their own identity. The monster should work as a metaphor for a deeper feeling, so it resonates better. And so
That's
that's
fantastic.
within each story, there's going to be different monsters, there's going to be different horror themed concepts, but they're all going to stem from some very real and relatable emotions.
That's fantastic. I think some of those stories are always the best because they connect with you at a deeper level as just like you can definitely enjoy them as just plain old stories at the surface level, but then they also connect to you at a more deeper level, and that's where people, those stories have longevity because of that, because more and more people can discover it over several generations and relate to that.
Absolutely, that is the dream right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge horror fan in general, and historically there's always been an interesting mix of queerness around the margins, kind of if you know where to look, or references, something that's more implied, but the representation isn't always there. And so I think as a creative, it's so exciting to be able to just make the representation that you wanted to see, and just make the I feel like my target audience is really myself in high school and middle school, essentially. Like, this is I'd love for everyone to check out these comics, of course, but it's
Yeah.
a bit more selfish. And I think it helps to bring more authenticity to it. Is thinking back to that very like volatile time, and what is the exact book that I could have given my younger self, and just been like, read this. This will make you feel so much better, and maybe answer
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
questions along the way.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I know. Like just entering teens in high school is like a big thing in itself. With the school and with your own hormones going through the roof, and things like that. And then the whole when you're also kind of going through your identity things, and things like that. There's a lot. It can get a little overwhelming, and when there's something that can help you process that a little bit. I think that's a great thought, to have. Like, I'm pretty sure people who would read your book and are able to relate to it would really appreciate that they could see a little bit of themselves in it. So
Absolutely. I think, I kind of market this as being very YA oriented, but I really think it's, anyone that age or older who can relate to those feelings and kind of go back to a younger time. So I think there's something in it for everyone for sure. I'm also a very big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show,
yeah.
which I okay, so I love the show. I have a lot of feelings, especially with the show, the creator, the queer representation on that. But I do feel like I watched that at college in a very like formulative moment in my own creative development. I was kind of realizing like what kind of comics I wanted to make. I was really figuring out some of my own identity, and here comes the show that was very like empowering in a way. There are ways to view it through representation. It had a really great
Hmm.
mixture of humor and heart and actual horror. And so I think that really struck a chord with me. And so when I was creating these stories, that was also always in the back of my mind of tonally, this is what I want to shoot for. It's Buffy the
Yeah.
Vampire with maybe some Heartstopper thrown along the way.
Yeah. Both Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Heartstopper have something in common. They're both effortlessly funny. They're like they don't try too hard to be funny, They're and I know all about the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and those issues, but um, the show itself is actually strikes the right balance between fun and action, and it has some serious moments here and there, but it just right, like strikes that fine balance really well, and that's
Absolutely.
where the sweet spot is. Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's also this project kind of came out of the pandemic in me realizing, well, okay, the world's kind of gone to hell. who knows what, like everything's on fire, all like metaphorically, but like there's so much going on. It's very turbulent. If I was able to just tune it all out and focus on just drawing, what would I make? You know, what would be the project that would really, that I could, for lack of a better pun, sink my teeth into. Speaking of blush, uh, that would really engage me and would be kind of a relief from the perils of the real world. And so this also came out of that process of really wanting to stay in this
Mm.
world and kind of focus on this coming of age, this empowerment, and puns. There are some other fun vampire related puns in Blush.
Can't get enough of them. I want more
Yes.
puns.
Oh, yes. All part of the creative process there is pun development.
I know. It is very, very punny, and it's a pun process. So yeah. Cool. Awesome. And also, like, coming back to your point about like talking to other publishers and working with Craven, I think that's the big flexibility that you can get working in indie space. You can get these specific areas that actually you can just focus on. Like, there's all the like there's a whole space of indie community that's just focused on queer representation, and a lot of different kinds of LGBTQ stories. Some of them also, like, I've seen some anthologies that mix queer stories with other stories and just make it part of the like their own. It's like, yeah, it's part of the world. So instead of standing it out a little bit, they just mix it up because it's just another part of the world, and that's beautiful as well. And that's the beauty of going indie, instead of, say, I mean, I would love if you get to work for Disney, but Disney is not really the most known for its representation, and as they call it, it's very queer baiting, as opposed to
Great. You have
doing something more real. But
you have all the Disney villains who like kind of give off gay vibes, but it's like, well, what kind of message are we imparting here, guys? Let's, I don't
yeah,
know,
exactly.
let's workshop this one a bit more. And that is something that I've loved about working with Craven is the real creative freedom to make the story exactly how I wanted, both in formatting, in the length, the timeline, the scheduling. It's been a very open and collaborative process. And kind of through making this comic, through connections with Craven and promoting this on social media, I've gotten to meet so many different indie creators, publishers, web platforms such as yourself, which is I'm truly blown away by. It was so cool to see, and just
Thank you.
it felt like I was opening a treasure chest just on my phone. And I was like, this place is so cool, and things like that. It's such a rich world to dive into. So I'm really glad to be a part of that.
No, that's amazing, and that's, like I said, that's the beauty of indie comics and the community, is you get to be yourself, and there's no hiding it. You can be like unabashedly yourself, and get away with it, and yeah, that's when you make your best work. Yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Oh no, go
So you were
ahead.
saying something. I think there's this bit of a delay. Sorry
Oh
about
no,
that.
just kind of reiterating with it. That's been, yeah, the authenticity part has been crucial to making these stories. And I think making them, there's always just that moment as a creative where it just sort of clicks in your brain, like this is the story. This is it. I can see the concept clear enough in my mind. This is what needs to be on the page. And I think for me, it's when I kind of I make it more personal. I draw upon my own growing up and adolescent experience, and I just kind of, it resonates with me.
Yes. Awesome. Cool. So this is one of my favorite segments. I love to ask the top five pop culture things that you like. I know you touched
Ooh.
upon briefly about Runaways and Young Avengers, but let's get into it. It could be comics, it could be movies, it could be, cartoons or TV shows, anything that you like. And you also mentioned Buffy, but let's say top five pop culture things that you like.
Oh my gosh. So just things in general. We're talking, it could be any kind of media, anything like that. Wow. Ooh. That's
It's a
probably
broad
better
question,
that
I
you
know.
it's better that you put me on the spot because otherwise I would have spent like all of last night being like what, only five things. What are the five things that define me the most creatively? Oh god, do I even like five whole things? Who knows? um yeah, oh my gosh. Well, let's see. Okay, so what comes to mind? I think what I love, well, and one of the first ever like horror movies that I really got into, that I kind of realized, oh, I really love this. Like this is for me. I'm resonating with this in a weird way. Is the original Nightmare on Elm Street, the old
Mm,
1980 classic horror movie. I was actually, because I had grown up watching some horror here or there. I loved like Goosebumps growing up, that book series, but that was also very kid focused, and so as I kind of grew up, I thought, oh, horror's too scary. It's too gross. It's not for me. But then I finally watched this movie and I was like, oh no, this is absolutely for me. This is so much fun. It's engaging. I think one of the cool things about horror as a genre is that it's so hard to be boring. Like even if
yeah.
it's cheesy, if it's serious, if it's funny, it's such a lively genre and there's so many different avenues to explore. A lot of social issues, a lot of identities through really fun metaphors, and it's always entertaining. You know, you're always going to be
Mm,
sucked into this world for however long the movie or book or piece of media is, and it's such fun escapism almost. So Nightmare on Elm
very
Street, I
true.
feel like really kind of awakened that feeling for me, and it was kind of off to the races from there. I think I also want to give out horror wise. So that's number one, let's say. That's only number one. Strap in. I promise I won't go on too many tangents here. But
That's
I
okay.
also I have to give out a shout out for number two would have to be the horror movie Seed of Chucky. Now, how familiar are you with the
Mm.
Child's Play Chucky Killer Doll franchise?
I have seen
Any
a few, but not
Okay, so
not
have
all
you
of them.
seen this is maybe like the fifth one, I believe. And
Mm.
so this one I quickly watched after Nightmare on Elm Street because I was realizing, okay, I like horror. Well, where's the queer horror? Where's the representation? And the Google search resulted in a lot of mixed reviews, but this was the one that I was kind of pointed to, and I got into it.
Okay.
The plotline of the movie, essentially one of the plot lines. It's a very chaotic movie, but Chucky the Killer Doll has a canonically non-binary child who ironically looks like David Bowie. Like it's this cute little like 2 foot doll that looks like David
Yeah.
Bowie. Kind of talks like this weird British accent, and the whole course of the movie is this doll figuring out their own gender identity in a very binary world. And it's not a perfect metaphor. These are also like killer dolls. There's a lot of murder involved. It's not like perfect representation by any stretch, but it does specifically tackle identity and queerness in a very direct way. That this movie came out in like the early 2000s, so I think that was,
Hmm.
I mean, that was very remarkable for the time, and still kind of is. And I just remember seeing it and feeling very seen by this weird little British David Bowie looking doll, and the movie kind of made me
It's
feel
so
like,
hilarious.
yes, there is space for your whole authentic self here. Like, welcome, you know? And so
Nice.
that always stayed with me for sure. And so, okay, that was number two. Let's see. Uh, number three, gosh, I kind of along the lines of Goosebumps was a book series that I also devoured as a child. That looking back
Hmm.
on it now, I'm pretty sure has had so much of an effect on me as a creator, as an artist. It's Are you familiar with Animorphs, the '90s
Animorphs.
book series? It has
No.
it was this, I think it was put out by Scholastic, this very long running '90s book series of all these teens who they kind of gained the ability to turn into various animals. and they were tasked
Mm.
with fighting off this infectious parasitic alien race that was trying to overtake the Earth. You might know this
Right.
from the book covers that have very badly photoshopped, like a step by step process of you have like step one is like the teenager, and step five is like a frog. And so you see this very weird progression of this humanoid animal hybrid that looks so bizarre and you can't look
Yeah.
away. Like it's so captivating. But that book series was episodic. It really focused on this sort of characters coming of age and took their emotions very seriously.
Yeah.
And like as an adult, I have found those books like while thrifting, looking them up online, and they're surprisingly deep. They go into kind of the like how these teens effectively are fighting a war and are having PTSD. They're talking
Wow.
about concepts like genocide, but with aliens, and these really deeper topics. That's like how did you fit this into a I mean these kids are just turning into like birds. Like how did this fit
Yeah.
in so effectively? But I feel like I read that those books as a very young person, as a kid, and I was just like I want to make this. I want this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just I loved the feeling of reading those and being in that world.
That's amazing.
Gosh. Okay, number four. Number four, I think is also was for a very formative and kind of more relevant now. I would say, or it's been in the news more lately. It's Avatar: The Last Airbender. But the
Wow. That's a
cartoon.
beautiful, beautiful show. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh! Now that I have this distinct memory of watching that for the first time as a child and being like, I want to draw that. Like learning that people actually drew what was on the screen, I was like, I want my art to look like that. And so I think stylistically, the way those characters are drawn, their kind of emotive faces, I really think does show up in my work almost subconsciously. Like I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
watching each episode and like pausing on a frame and being like, okay, I like how they drew this eye, but like in the back of my mind, I really feel like that was a foundation to my own creative voice that I draw. Hmm.
Fantastic. That's
Gosh. And
fantastic.
number
And
five.
Avatar
Okay.
has so many subtle things built into it that show like at least the cartoon. Like I'm not talking about the live action TV show. I haven't watched it. Um, I'm
Mhm.
always scared of watching live action anime adaptations because I don't want to spoil anything that like it's one of those things I've always loved and revered since the beginning. So I just even if this they've changed something that I really loved, I don't want to do that. So it's just a good memory I want to keep
And
with.
that's the thing that I've only seen the first episode of the live action adaptation, but they do, without spoiling anything, they do shift around some of the scenes. So it very clearly is not like a recreation of that first episode, and it just feels weird. It's just like I don't know. I want to watch the cartoon again. And it's what's also weird is the actors on that show are very well cast and look just like the cartoon drawings, which is just
Yeah.
kind of uncanny to watch. Like they're real people, but they also look like cartoons. Just it felt like a weird out of body experience watching this first
Yeah.
episode. Like a little robotic almost. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. So, but yeah, again, another children's piece of media that also really touches on some very dark and heavy subjects, but in a very like thoughtful way, and is just so inventive and so much fun to look at. And I think that show was really one of the first times where I looked up like, okay, who created it? Who was drawing this? What I was learning about, and I was very young now, so I was looking up like what storyboards were, what what I mean. They had backgrounds in comic book making, so what did they work on? Like the main creators, and kind of figuring out names and figuring out these people's life paths and realizing, oh, this is a thing that people can do.
Mm,
They can draw these things, and I so can I want to draw this stuff too. So really had such a profound impact. What a show. Truly I don't
yeah.
think it's enough praise.
That's so cool. That's really very cool. I think yeah, like some of those shows have such formative effect on your on your creative thinking as well, right? Like
Yeah, it's
I
so
I've yeah.
so
The,
impressionable. You just soak it all in like a sponge.
I know exactly. Yeah, I think like even like when I was growing up, there was I think I was early 90s, and there was so much like the late 80s had a little bit of effect on the early 90s, where they had 80s was a very like they would just put anything in a movie, and get away with it because they could put brutal violence in a kids movie and get away with it. And like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
the yeah, exactly, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, like the one that was from the 80s, was actually very brutal. Like there were so many things that I don't think they can actually do in this day and age. um and it just was like watching like all these like violence in the movies while growing up was very different to the time now. So like it had that effect on me, that I really enjoyed a lot of like action, science fiction kind of movies. But some like and even like reading like Isaac Asimov and some of those classic science fiction authors at that time, uh, they didn't. The movie, the media was pretty straight for the lack of better term. So it was very hard to find something that was close to me in that sense in those in the media of that time. But yeah, I think to this day today, there's so much more better representation, I would say,
Yeah,
in all
it's fun
forms.
to
So
find
yeah,
other creatives who have also kind of had a similar experience growing up and are just kind of like, well, I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna make my own characters, forge my own way, connect these voices.
absolutely,
And that kind of does, because
absolutely.
I realized I don't think I mentioned the fifth thing, and I would hate to keep listeners on the edge, but I feel like it's a good segue because you mentioned Isaac Asimov and science fiction, so good setup there, actually. I am a huge fan of the comic book series Saga. I mean, have you read Saga?
Mm,
Right? I mean,
yes,
how could
yeah,
who
yeah.
hasn't? You know, it is so
Who hasn't?
ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember being in college, and by that point, I had kind of fallen off of superheroes and comics because a lot of my growing up experience was reading a lot of superhero comics because that was what was around. I think in terms of the middle grade or YA field, Bone by Jeff Smith was a really big series. I really enjoyed that,
Love
but
Bone.
there wasn't as much like, okay, if you like this, try this, and not as many creators in that space as there are now. And so the range was a bit more limited in terms of enjoying superheroes, but kind of not resonating with me as much as something like Young Avengers had, which had only so many issues, and I always wanted to read more.
Yeah.
But back in college, I distinctly remember I was sitting there in a lecture class, and one of my friends was reading Saga on her laptop, even truly was just like had it open, was reading a digital comic and not listening to the professor, but it looked so cool. I turned around and I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" Not to creep on your computer or anything, but this looks amazing. What are you reading? And she told me about Saga, and then that night I just I devoured it. I
That's
bought
so good.
initially digital, and then I fully bought it in print because I was like, I just need more of this series. And that series I think is really what got me so much more hooked back into comics as a medium, as a form of storytelling, and it's just so visually inventive that I felt so inspired just to make stuff after reading it. um, and so I really think that whole series is so well. You talk about science fiction being very aggressively straight, very dude focused, very very samey in that regard. And this is a series that rejects all of that. That is so aggressively
Yeah.
queer and trans and inclusive. And is definitely for an older audience, but really puts like a deeper human emotions at the forefront,
Hmm.
and in a way that you just can't look away from. And so I feel like that's always the gold standard of comic book making, of and just like visual storytelling is. Saga is so cool. I want to make something like half as cool as this.
Agree on that. I would say I would rate Saga in my top 10 as well. So yeah, I 100% agree. Awesome. Uh, we're coming close to time, but before we go, I'll give you the floor and let you talk about Blush. Like just give us the whole spiel, and give us the whole rundown of what Blush is about, and pitch it to the audience, as I love to say that.
I would love that. I would love
Yeah.
that. So, Blush, this is my most recent release with Craven Comics, the follow up to Party Animals. I kind of the elevator pitch that I gave to Craven initially was Taylor Swift adapted Twilight. Essentially, like you have the emotional range of an intensity of Taylor Swift, but like with the whole kind of weird setup of Twilight, which was also maybe not my favorite piece of media growing up, but did have a big impact on me, I feel like, as just a person in popular culture. You couldn't escape
Mm,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And so it is this very sweet coming of age story. It's about kind of boy meets boy. Boy realizes he has a very queer crush on the other boy. The other boy is harboring a secret that he and his dad are actually vampires and are kind of trying to keep that on the down low. But while they're doing that, there are some mysterious disappearances going on in their small town they're all in that definitely seem vampire related and probably are because it's there's only so many pages in the comic. I'll say that. There's
Mm,
some interesting disappearances going on that are tied into this family in a unique way. And so on the one hand, it is this very sweet, like first queer love story. There are scenes of these two characters going on their first awkward date, having a picnic. I drew myself in this comic as a very snarky movie theater attendant because there's a scene where the two main characters like they both get their wallets out to pay for the tickets, but they're like, well, growing up, you're always told like, oh, it's the guy who pays for everything, but we're both dudes, so who does what? And
yeah, yeah.
there I am in the fun panel being like, I'm not babysitting you. Someone needs to pay me $27. I don't care. So you get a little Stanley S cameo in there too. Um,
Nice,
and
nice.
so it's a very fun mixture of very sweet, heartfelt queer feelings with some very interesting vampire stuff. I really tried
Yeah,
to put my own creative spin on this in terms of what the vampire looks like and how they're depicted, and it's very unique. And so I'm so excited for that. And the whole comic, you can kind of see with the cover here, it's rendered in this very fun dark crimson color since they're vampires. It feels
yeah,
very fitting with the theme. And then you have blush, which is on the one hand you're kind of like the blood rushes to your cheeks because you're a little embarrassed to be around your crush, but also they're vampires, so they're going to be around blood
yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a fun play on that. It was so much fun to make, and I hope that people really enjoy it. It's the officially the second release in this anthology, but each story is very self-contained. There are gonna be some fun elements that kind of add up over time into more of a shared world kind of story, but they're all very accessible, very fun to read. And the goal now is to be releasing more of these every 3 months or so, like once a quarter, essentially. Um, and so that kind of gives us enough time to fully create and edit these stories and lay them out digitally. We're working on some additional printing options as well. And it gives us us being myself and Craven, some more time behind the scenes to tweak everything and make it all perfect. So it's been so much fun to make, and I'm so excited to be able to show what's coming next. And I'm really grateful for the platform like Comics here, that really
Thank you.
is showcasing this story. And so this has been so exciting, and I'm so glad to be able to have my comic on your site here.
No, thank you so much. No, I the pleasure is truly mine, to be honest. Like I one of the aims for Comics.1 is that I want authentic stories to be there, beautiful authentic stories. And that's what I felt, with Party Animals in the first place, and then this even more so, So yeah, I'm really lucky to have Craven and you on the platform, and yeah, I'm very lucky to also bring it to a wider audience through digital, around the world. It's a global platform. Anybody in the world can access it. Hopefully, a lot of readers from around the world who are queer can and non-queer as well can relate to these stories. They work for any teenager or any young adult in that sense. Any high schooler
Yeah,
can
the
actually relate to that.
the
So
teens and
yeah.
all of us, we're everyone was that age at one point and kind of relate to those emotions. And I also have to give a shout out too with the Comics.1, this platform, how like just how smooth the interface is and how easy it is to read digitally. Because that's the thing with not all digital comics platforms are built the same, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But with this one, it's so easy to navigate, easy to read through, and I'm like, even if I didn't have my comic on your platform, I would also be saying this. Like, it is truly so engaging to go through, just as a reader, and so that's all that you can hope for when you make these stories is to make sure they have a really engaging home. And so
Yeah.
I'm just really grateful for all of it.
Thank you. I truly appreciate it. I'm sorry. I think I'm kind of diving back into something. I remembered I forgot to ask you
Please.
about how long have you planned this arc? And you did mention you did touch upon that briefly on how many books and how you're going to release every quarter, but can you give us a bit of a sneak peek into what the future of the series is going to look like?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. Thank you for asking this. Yeah, so right now the goal now is to have six of these stories that will be later collected into one big graphic novel, and so you have these kind of first five that are going to be very self-contained, but kind of alluding to a shared world, alluding to some connections between characters that are all going to culminate in a sixth and final story that this series is going to slowly but surely build up to in a really
Mm,
fun, organic way. And so, without giving away too many details, but still teasing some stuff, I'd encourage readers to pay close attention to background characters, to details, especially in these first two stories, and then this next one that I have coming up as well, because it's sort of setting the stage for things to come. Something I love a good anthology, especially if it can kind of tie different elements of the world together very cleverly. Like I do enjoy American Horror Story, the TV show. Kind
mm,
of each season definitely varies in terms of quality. It's, a much more adult oriented show, but one of the things that I really enjoy about it is just as a fan getting to follow these tiny clues and elements and characters as they show up in different stories and different worlds. And so that might give some hints to readers and viewers here about how this story is going to go. I will say this third story coming up next, which will be releasing in June for Pride Month here in the States. It will center around haunted house actors. Um,
mm,
and I the just the whole setup of that of just putting on a really weird costume and trying to scare people
mm,
just out of a Friday night. I think it's an interesting little world unto itself that is really fun to
mm.
draw. And so without getting too much into that yet, I can tease that there's a lot of fun moments. I've had so much fun creating this and bringing that to life. So keep on the lookout. Then I'll be posting all about this as soon as June
Nice.
rolls around for sure.
We're pretty excited to see what's next, and I also kind of love how beautifully, like visually, they're so similar but different in terms of the color coding and how you've made that work. And yeah, I think the stories do stand on themselves, and then when they're connected, it's always good to do that. Like, oh, where's that Easter egg? Where's that clue that I can find that kind of relates to the whole story? So yeah, that's amazing.
Absolutely. And I will say on that front, I have to give Craven some credit here, because originally Party Animals, I was going to draw it fully black and white, in case it would, and this was well before Craven came along. I was thinking like, if I was going to self-publish this, if this was going to be done in print, maybe I should just keep it to black and white to save on printing costs. But Craven was very supportive and adamant that no, like what is your creative vision for this? Don't just sacrifice that for a budget. I really want to see where you can take this and what you're really thinking about here. And so that's kind of how I realized, oh, I really enjoy this kind of monochromatic setup within the
Mm,
comic. It really helps to create some very high contrast, dynamic visuals. But also I don't get too caught in the weeds in terms of tiny details, tiny rendering, hatching. Like, it doesn't have to be fully rendered to be effective,
mm,
and so it's a really fun way to explore the story. And each story is monochromatic with a sort of color that kind of helps with the tone of it. And so,
yeah.
ideally, I'll be able to line up each entry and just have a fun little colorful rainbow. Not quite Roy G. Biv, but still a very fun to line up and see them all together.
That's awesome. No, that's fantastic. I think it makes the story a little bit more effective, and I think you've created your own unique visual style that way. So yeah, kudos to that. Good work.
Thank you. And I really do have to give credit to, I mean, the entire, so many artists and writers and creatives who kind of work in the sort of middle grade and young adult field almost in graphic novels now, because I mean, that as a concept, I think has just exploded within the last 10 to 15 years or so in a really exciting
Yeah,
way. And so the more that was coming out, the more I would see, especially in college when I was kind of uh, having a very academic approach to art and comics and researching what was out there. I would see these graphic novels and something would stir in me like, oh, I want to draw like this. How do I draw like this? Um,
yeah,
so I have to. I really want to give credit, artists like Molly Knox Ostertag with her Witch Boy series, Faith Erin Hicks with so many graphic novels. Like, she's very
yeah,
prolific. Oh my gosh! I mean, everyone who's done anything for First Second or like Random House Graphic,
yeah,
I love their own visual languages, and I think it's a not a genre, but a type of graphic novel that always there's room for so many different visual voices and interpretations within kind of a general overview of like young adult, something like that. And so I just want to give a shout out to too many artists to list at once, but just anyone working in that medium has influenced my own work in some way, shape, or form, especially with the sort of Nightshade anthology I've been working on. And so it's
mm,
a robust field, and yeah, I'm just so glad that I can contribute my part and kind of pay homage to that.
that's awesome. On that note, we that could be our closing comments. So on that note, thank you for coming on the show, Laurie. Really, really appreciate your time today, and yeah, all the best for Blush and all the other books beyond that.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I cannot wait to keep working on this, keep working with you on these digital comic releases. And yeah, I'm so excited for what the future holds. So many more comics for
Amazing.
sure.
Yeah, that's what we like to hear.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Will be, yes.
Aw- Awesome. Till next time. Thank you everyone for
All
tuning
right.
in,
Thank you.
and
Take care.
have a good rest. Yeah.